Hi Year 11, so here's a short video for you guys on an inspector calls, and I'm going to walk you through a sample answer for this question for your mocks. So first off, I'm just going to remind you about the mocks and the format that they take. So it's Wednesday the 11th of November, only a few days away, an hour and 40 minutes if you have normal time, and this is how we suggest you divide your time up. So about 50 minutes per section, 5 minutes to read, annotate and plan because you're going to have an extract, 40 minutes to write each section, so maybe 20 minutes on the extract and then 20 minutes on the rest of the text, or maybe you might want to do 15 minutes on each paragraph, however you plan best, and then 5 minutes to check and proofread. And this is really important. Maybe you've missed out or maybe you've put had twice or something silly like that. It's important to proofread and make sure that that's fine. Extra time is 2 hours and 5 minutes, so for your extra time I would suggest that you use a bit more time in this main bulk of your exam, writing with your paragraphs or your bullet points, however you approach it. So looking at the inspector calls question, you only have one question, and this is slightly different from the real exam that you will have. We're giving you an extract in the mock to reflect the fact that you haven't studied this for a very long time and the fact that your learning of this text was disturbed by the lockdown. So you are going to have an extract for this, but in the real exam what you will be given is 2 questions and you will get to choose one. But there will be no extract for either of them, and it's based on a character, theme or idea from an inspector calls and linked to AO 1, 2 and 3. So having a look at the AOs. The first one is AO1. Read, understand and respond to texts, maintaining a critical style and developing an informed personal response through textual references, including quotations, to support and illustrate interpretations. This is all about your understanding of the text. Do you know what the text is about? Have you got a clear view of what happens when? Do you understand what characters' relationships are like and how they interact with each other? So this is essentially your understanding, but the word interpretations is very important. We'll come to that later. AO2, analyse the language, form and structure used by a writer to create meanings and effects using appropriate subject terminology where appropriate to support. So language, form and structure. Structure is an important one to think about with an inspector calls because obviously the tension builds across the play as we get closer and closer to the realisation that every single member of the Burling family plus Gerald was involved in Eva Smith's suicide in some way. As well as this, Priestley builds in these cliffhangers at the end of each act. So for example, at the end of Act 1 there's a cliffhanger when Sheila and Gerald are sort of having an argument about Gerald's involvement with Eva, and then the inspector re-enters the room. There's a lot of tension brought in. At the end of Act 2 is obviously when Eric comes back and the penny is sort of dropped that he is the person who got Eva Smith pregnant. So think about that when you are planning your essays. And then lastly is AO3, show an understanding of the relationships between texts and the historical and social contexts in which they were written and how this might impact the text/meaning. So not just what is the context, what year was it written, but how does that impact the text? How has that changed what Priestley was trying to do? So maybe thinking about Priestley's background as a soldier in the First World War and his socialist views. So I'm going to go through the mark scheme really quickly. I want to remind you guys that English is skill based. It's not tick a box and for every tick you get a certain number of marks. All of the skills are the same across the mark scheme, but what moves up is the depth of the skill. So in level 1 we're at simple comments. Level 2 goes to supported response and level 3 goes to some explained response. I want to remind you guys that you might have the same idea, but what will move you up the levels is how well you explain the idea, how well you develop the idea, and how well you tie in the language analysis to support that idea. If we have a look at this part of the mark scheme, this is obviously where we're aiming from level 4 upwards. Clear explained response, thoughtful developed response, and then here at the very top in level 6, critical, exploratory, conceptualized response. And this is important because if it's conceptualized, it means that you've got your own ideas about the text. It's not just what you've regurgitated. If you say something, like Priestley was a socialist, so the inspector is a socialist. That's a very obvious idea. This is where you want to try and bring in some ideas that maybe are a little bit different or a little bit more unusual. You're exploring different ideas in a critical way. As well as this, you can see analysis of writers' methods compared to examination or clear explanation. So obviously we're moving up the mark scheme as we go through. So I'm going to show you a sample essay that a student did based on a question about gender inequality in An Inspector Calls. And before I show you the essay, I just wanted to show you this plan that the student did. And you can see that this plan was done in a way that is very specific to this student. You guys might not understand her plan, but that's fine because it was her plan. It's not your plan, it's not my plan, it's nobody else's. It seems to me that she's put an idea here about, yes, men and women are separate, but then here she's thought about other ideas about how men and women are more equal than perhaps they first seem. What's really interesting as well is the way she's used different colours to put the quotes in. So the quotes are in red. And then the last thing I really like that she's done here is she's ticked off things when she's written about them. So as she goes through and writes her essay, she's come back to this and ticked them, which is really, really helpful because it kept her on track when she was doing it. So this is the whole sample essay. You can see it's 3 big chunky paragraphs. I'm going to pause this so that you guys can go ahead and read it yourself, or you should pause the video so you can read it yourself. I'm not going to read it aloud, but what we are going to do is then look at each paragraph in more depth. So starting with the first paragraph, I'm going to highlight each AO in each paragraph and sort of highlight the key things that this student is doing really, really well. So first here, when they've talked about how the Burling household is intrinsically linked to the control of the younger generation to the older generation, this is more exploratory. They're not just sticking to the idea of gender inequality, they're beginning to explore the links between themes. Here, these quotes that she's used, bitterly, unhappily, angrily and sternly, these are all stage directions, which I think is great. Sometimes we forget to use stage directions as quotes, but as well you can see this is very thoughtful, and the fact that she's just got one word for each quote, that's very helpful. Then we move on to the interpretation and the analysis. So representing Mr. Burling is using his patriarchal privilege to shut down anything that she may have to say. And in this case, the she is Sheila. So what's interesting is I like how she's talked about the patriarchal privilege. This is a very clear interpretation. Later on, we've got this zooming in on the word bitter, suggesting he fears the possibility of his daughter becoming more informed and intelligent than he is. And then when we've got, moving on from that, we've got hinted by the way Sheila is the first to accept her responsibility. So this analysis that we've got here, the AO2, is supported by a range of references. It's not just sticking to one point in the play. The whole paragraph will move across different parts of the play. As a man in the Edwardian period, he would have felt great embarrassment and distress at his daughter becoming more informed than he is. So here we've got a clear link to the context, the social context of 1912, leading on from the analysis of language. So this essay is a good example because at no one point does it ever use the word 1912 or 1914. Not saying that that wouldn't have enhanced the response, but I'm showing that you don't have to always put in these very obvious facts about context that are sort of tacked in at the end. It's about your understanding. Here again we've got a range of points. So Mrs. Burling regarding Sheila as a young girl is different from these points we've got earlier in the paragraph. Then we've got this very sophisticated use of subject terminology talking about how Sheila is infantilized, so essentially she's treated as a child in a very extreme way, which makes her believe that she's a child to an extent. Then I really like this. It's very fluently linked. This could be theorised as a cause of her ignorant and immature manner at the start of the play. So again, we're linking from one point to another. Not only have we just got this quote girl and they've analysed it, but now they've brought in this other quote and linked the two together. Then we've got Mr. Burling's patronising attitude reaches a peak. I've put here analysis of structure, and this is really important because we are talking about a peak. So we we're showing that we understand the structure and the development of the play. Again here, by adding a telephone ring after his final dialogue, that's again analysis of structure, because it's showing that Priestley's done this in a particular way for effect. Then here at the end, we've got this bit of AO1 with a strong conclusion to the paragraph. The advantages that he enjoys as a man allow him to bypass the troubles of others. So we link back to the question in terms of this approach that this person's taken about Mr. Burling. The second paragraph again is really good. So it moves fluently from point to point across the essay. The first paragraph was more about Mr. Burling and how he treats Sheila, and this paragraph is more about Mr. Burling and how he's very aware of his inferiority to his wife. And that's a really fluent link. Then if we have a look at this next bit, these short, concise quotes, you shouldn't be saying such things, obviously relates to the question. Here we've got a really nice bit of analysis. Such things links to the idea of women needing to censor and monitor their language to be considered ladylike, as though Burling said something completely grotesque and disgusting. This is as well almost a little bit of AO3, because it's showing how women had to act in this way at that time. But here we've got a bit of explicit AO3 with the context. Priestley is portraying how in the 1900s, despite gender roles, social class was still a highly important factor in family life. And again, they are focusing on the idea of gender inequality and gender roles, but they're linking that to other themes and still making insightful comments. Again, later in the play, these points are taken from across the text. It's not ever just one point in the play. I really love this quote. This is a really interesting quote. Mrs. Burling tells him in an agitated way to stop it. It wasn't I who turned her out of her employment. Not only have we got an embedded quote, but we've got the stage direction and we've got the ellipsis for the clarity as well. So this is a really well integrated quote. And then the analysis of the quote is really good as well. Mrs. Burling doesn't just ask Burling to keep out of it, she commands him and reminds him of his own guilt and responsibility in the whole situation, deflecting any blame that could have been laid with her. It wasn't me. So the analysis of this quotation is in depth. There's a depth to it, suggesting aspects about Mr. and Mrs. Burling and their relationship and the sort of way in which they speak to each other and what is suggested there. Here we've got this short reference, so Burling does not speak again until the end of Act 2 when he tells Sheila to be quiet. This is a great example of when you don't always have to use a quote to provide evidence. This is clear evidence, as Burling does not speak again until the end of Act 2. It would be very difficult to find one specific quote to show that he doesn't speak again. References are fine as long as we are analysing them as well. Here's some more AO2. Clear comments on the effects of characterisation, so examples of how gender inequality exists across all social classes. And then again, linking back to the question about gender inequality being shown as an equal issue to social class. So again, themes are related to one another, but always still linking back to the question. And the last paragraph, this one starts off with a very nice exploratory comment that links to the task and text about how Sheila is an overprotected commodity, commodity being something that can be bought or sold essentially, presenting how gender inequality existed in toxic ways. So there are judgments being made by this student about how Sheila is presented, which is really helpful. Here, when we've got this bit here about how the effect of Sheila and Mrs. Burling being sent out of the room to avoid the hard-headed talk. This is a really nice little bit of analysis, especially when we're talking about the implication that women's mindsets were not strong enough to accept such complex conceptual insights. And again, we have got a bit of AO3 sort of linking in here, because it shows that this person understands the social background of the play and understands the time setting of the play. Alliterative phrase hard-headed is repeated. So again, we're zooming in, but this subject terminology. Alliterative, that's just a word that you can use to refer to any alliteration. So hard-headed is alliteration, it's alliterative, and it's repeated as well. That again is subject terminology. Later in the play, Sheila attempts to interrupt her father by cutting in. So again, we're linking back to all the different parts of the play, but the quotes are very, very short. They're not very long, showing how little chance she's given to express her opinions. This is some clear and thoughtful analysis. I really like this, the academic tone. It could be argued that Sheila is nothing but a negotiation tool. We've got this academic tone coming in. The fact that it says it could be argued that shows that this person is thinking about multiple different interpretations. Sheila is nothing but a negotiation tool for her father to advance his business and build social connections. This is a great point, and the way that it's phrased creates the right sort of impression and helps us to understand the characterization. Again, another reference here about how Berling doesn't mention Sheila during this speech whatsoever. And then we have got a clear comment on the effect of that, how as a woman Sheila is left to follow the lead of men who control her life and make choices for her. And again, now we've got a bit of AO3, a bit more implicit and subtle, but it's showing that there is an understanding of the social and historical context. Priestley is able to surprise the audience later in the play when Sheila is the first person to understand the inspector's goal. This is a really nice way to talk about the writer's methods, because it shows how Priestley is manipulating the readers into thinking a certain thing, or we should say audience rather than readers. But by showing Sheila is particularly innocent at the beginning of the play, it's able to lure us into this idea of her being innocent, and it makes us think that she's not going to develop at all, when in fact we know she's the one who develops the most. And then we've got more links to context as well about how men would have dominated women's lives with decisions for her, linking to that relevant context. I just want to point out to you that the AOs here are very clearly sort of scattered across the paragraph. We've got them all put in different orders, and I think that's really, really useful because it shows the depth of understanding of this text. The fact that we've got bits of AO3 here, and as well at the end, how we've got the continued integration of quotes throughout. This shows that this person has got such a clear understanding of the play that is very in-depth. It's not just an understanding that she knows what's going on in the play, but she understands the effects of things that are happening, and that is shown by the way that things are integrated. So I just want to encourage you guys to do that in your mock. So a few key points for you all to remember. Number 1, you need to learn key quotes. Number 2, you need to focus on themes. In terms of the key quotes, you might want to use a variety of different methods to do the key quotes, but I would say don't just reread the book. If you're going to reread the play, please keep a notepad next to you and write down any key quotes that you find, or highlight them in your text as you go along. Focus on themes. A question may be on a character, but if you can answer a question on a theme, you can also answer a question on a character, so I would focus on the themes. Link the context to Priestley's message. We all know what Priestley was trying to do, but you need to be able to link the context to it. Ensure you understand the entire play. Make sure that you know who's in the room when something is said, because that is a really great reference that can support an idea that you might have. And develop the depth of your analysis. That is where a lot of your marks will come from, is having this depth of analysis. And revise, revise, revise. So the last thing, Year 11, is to say good luck, and I'm sure that we will see some brilliant bits of writing from you all in your marks.